Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage one of our own, a true member of the Rural Water family, Mr. Glenn Marswell.
Good morning, Rural Water. How is everyone? Great. It's so great to have you here today. I'm really impressed. So it's 8 o'clock, day 2, and the seats are full. So that's dedication. We're here in Florida. You could be in bed still, you could be out at the pools, but instead you're here. So that's dedication to our industry, and I really appreciate you being here. So Delco Water, we're one of the larger rural water systems in our nation. We're the largest in Ohio. Cover about 800 square miles, serve 130,000 customers. But our roots are rural water. We started small and we've just grown up. We happen to be in suburban Columbus in an area that's growing. 6 of our 10 board members are here this morning, and I wanted to talk about this one individual, Mr. Bill Cole. Hopefully he's here somewhere. He's not in bed. Is Bill here? There he is. So Bill has been on our board for 30 years. He's our longest current serving board member, 20 years as an officer. And you probably recognize him. If you come to the WaterPro regularly, you probably recognize him already. And if you have one of the exhibit booths and you have good swag, you probably recognize him. He comes by 3 or 4 times to pick up every day. He's great at that. But today, Bill is 89 years young. So would you help me thank him? Happy birthday, Bill. Thanks for your service to Delco and to rural water. So we'll get right on with the lesson. First, we're going to start with the origins of water. And we're not going to go back to the small well in town, but rather the first actual water supply and distribution system, the first major utility. And we're talking about the Roman Empire. So the famous Roman aqueduct system was in service from about the 500-year period, kind of circled around the birth of Christ. And what they did is they found a clean water supply in the mountains, and they brought that water in using a clean and covered supply system. The engineers, of course, they knew water flowed down hills, but they were excellent enough that they were able to identify, the slope of the mountains and the slope in Rome and build a steady slope conveyance system to bring that water straight in to Rome. Now, the famous Roman aqueduct, the raised systems that we see with the famous Roman arches that kind of revolutionized architecture, that's only 5% of the system. 95% of it was actually underground through mountains. Here's a map, the Roman area. At its peak, there was 11 aqueducts, and they served approximately 200 million gallons per day to Rome. The longest of which is 59 miles. 59-mile pipeline in from the mountains. Delco is currently working on a 3-mile raw water line, and it's very expensive and it's a big challenge. So I'm really impressed that the Roman engineers, with their construction technique, were able to provide that kind of service line to Rome. At its peak, Rome was about 1 million people. So we're talking about a system that provided between 100 and 200 gallons per day per capita. That's impressive even by today's standards. And Rome knew how impressive it was. It was kind of their pride. You look at the culture, you look at everything that they had, the great cities, the architecture. They knew that this water system was what really set them apart in the world. And it was kind of their message of superiority. The people were prideful of it. The public could get water every day in the public fountains. I'm sure you've heard of the famous Roman bathhouses. And the wealthiest individuals, they actually had taps in their homes. So more recently, an aqueduct system was built in New York City, and you kind of see the difference between the two. The Romans, they didn't have good pressurized pipe joints, so they just bridged the valleys on the way into Rome. Whereas New York City and other systems, they have pressurized pipe, and they just bring it in underground. And speaking of New York City, here's a map of theirs. System that was built starting in the late 1800s. They have 3 major aqueducts, the longest of which is 125 miles. But I certainly don't think that takes away from that 59-mile achievement that the Romans put in with their construction equipment that they had available. So one of the great things about the New York City system is their watershed. They own and they maintain all the areas around all their lakes. And because they've done such a good job keeping the area pristine, all they have to do to this day is add fluoride and disinfect They've never put in a filtering plant. And because it's up in the mountains, they use almost no energy to deliver that water to their residents. So it's such an efficient and effective system for them. Now here's a picture of the aqueduct kind of coming through the mountainside, and then if you do it 180 degrees, that's what it looks like running down through the valley. Now, of course, when this was in operation, this would have been covered, but since then, the cap on it has deteriorated. They were sophisticated enough to have what they call a castellium divorcium. So this is a big valve station. It's got an entrance, and then by putting plates, they could direct the water where they wanted to. So they could send it maybe for a few hours a day. The public knew that they could get the water out of the public fountains, other days to the bathhouses or the individuals. And of course, one of the main things that they're able to do, in case they ever have a shortage, they can certainly control how much water ends up in Rome. So again, the Romans were able to use gravity to bring that water into town, and they could take it down from their raised aqueduct system into town. Whereas today, we use our elevated tanks and pressurized pipe, and we do the same thing. Now, I love the way that elevated tank looks there in Rome, and I've been talking to my board for a while. I think it's time for us to start a franchise in Rome. And I'll be ready to head out there whenever you're ready. I'll handle that one myself. So the Roman Empire went on for about 500 years, and then around 200 AD-ish, it kind of fell apart, and it was a long, long time before we saw large water systems again. About 1,500 years. We're going to fast forward to London. And at that time, it had finally kind of exceeded its groundwater capacity. And a series of private companies stepped up to fill that need, to fill that service for the London citizens, to provide them water. One of which is called the New River Company, and it did it the best way. They found a good pure source, a spring, but it was 30 miles from London, so they had to bring a canal, build a canal to bring it into town. All the other ones used the River Thames. And the River Thames, like all rivers in the day, in addition to providing water for the residents, it also provided all the sewage outlet for town. So not quite such a good source there. Here's a map of London. See the New River, again, they brought that 30-mile spring-fed canal, by far the safest, but much more expensive, right? They had to pay for all the capital costs to dig that canal into town. And this went on for quite a while until an outbreak of cholera. And this really kind of changed the way we thought about water when this outbreak had happened. John Snow was a very famous physician in London, and he actually used what I call an early GIS, a Geographic Information System, something that we use regularly in the water industry. You can hear about those here at the WaterPro conference, incidentally. But he used an early GIS, and what it was a map with thumbtacks on it, and it was able to identify, well, here's where all the people are getting sick. And he had already kind of thought, well, I think it's associated with the water. You know, most folks at the time thought that all the health issues were breathing the bad air because everything smelled so bad. But he was the one that identified it to be in the water, and sure enough, he found a very contaminated well with sewage and feces in it, and they were able to shut that down simply by removing the handle and covering it up. Problem solved, but it really changed the mindset of folks. They figured out that where you get your water is very important to public health. So we kind of changed the way we do things, not substantially, but initially the outcome was, well, you know, the two water companies that were pulling water from inside the city, they moved their inlets upriver of London. So at least they're taking it before the sewage gets in. And then they asked their engineers, let's find a solution to get the sewage out of town. And we civil engineers, we do the best we can. We do it as cheaply as we can, as efficiently as we can. So they basically just figured a way to pipe it, and they pipe it down river of London. Get rid of the sewage. And that kind of was the height of water planning at the time, right? We're going to take the water upriver of town, so we don't have our own sewage in it, and we're going to discharge our sewage downriver of town. New York City is going up, but of course they've already invested in an aqueduct system, so they don't have some of the health issues that we had in other areas. Chicago wasn't so fortunate. Most of their waste went into the Chicago River, which they nicknamed the Stinking River for obvious reasons. They had a great source, Lake Michigan, right? But the Chicago River outletted to Lake Michigan, and if the wind was blowing the wrong way on a given day, sometimes some of that sewage would work its way back up in their intake. So they wanted to do the same thing as London and everyone else. Well, we need to get rid of the sewage. But what do you do when the outlet of your river is in Lake Michigan? I mean, that's the end of your watershed. Well, their engineers did something a little bit more substantial. They actually reversed the flow of the Chicago River. And by pumping 1 billion gallons per day out of Lake Michigan into the Chicago River and with a series of locks, they were able to redirect that flow into the Des Plaines River, which eventually went down to St. Louis. And as you would imagine, St. Louis wasn't really thrilled about getting Chicago's sewage, right? Their health commissioner says the Chicago River is probably the most foully polluted river in the world. And that's the kind of thing you say when somebody's about to send a lot of sewage your way. So they filed lawsuits and injunctions, but Chicago was simply too fast to the punch, and they were able to get that done. And to this day, Chicago is pumping 1 billion gallons per day of Lake Michigan water to redirect the Chicago River. Now, of course, they do it for transportation reasons. They've fixed all of their sewage issues up, but they're still pumping it out. And that is actually kind of an important thing because it's very contrary to the Great Lakes Compact. I'm going to touch on that real quickly for you. For those of you who don't know what that is, in 2008, all the states in the Great Lakes Basin in the U.S., along with the provinces in Canada, entered into a binding agreement that says no more use of Great Lakes water outside of our watershed unless it's unanimously approved. And why is that so relevant? Well, it's a pretty important source. So we look on a world scale, only 2.5% of our water is fresh water. 97.5% is salt water. And of that 2.5%, 99% of it is either in our polar ice caps or it's in groundwater. So you're talking about 1/4% of our water, of the water on Earth, is surface fresh water. So not very much to begin with, right? And then in the entire world, 21% of that water is in our Great Lakes. And 95% of the United States freshwater is in our Great Lakes system. And I don't know the population of the Great Lakes watershed, but it's a lot less than 95%. So whether that's a fair agreement, I suppose it all depends on which side of the Great Lakes divide you live on, right? So we're going to move on to water treatment, the actual first water treatment plants. And I'll tell you a tale of Lowell and Lawrence, Massachusetts, on the Merrimack River, about an hour north of Boston. These were textile towns, and they dammed up the Merrimack River to provide the energy to run their textiles. Believe it or not, in 1850, Lowell was actually the largest industrial town in the United States. And Lawrence saw the success of Lowell right upriver, so they tried to replicate it right 10 miles downstream. Here's a map of Lowell, the Merrimack River. Of course, it's dammed up to provide energy for the mills. And again, like every city at the time, the canals, now they've made, and the river served as open sewers. But the cities did what we're supposed to do at the time. They took their water upriver of town. People simply dealt with the foul odors. It's part of living in a textile town, it's part of living at the time. And this went on until 1890. Not cholera this time, but typhoid was the issue, an outbreak of that. And they called in the father of public health, William Sedgwick. And he and his team were kind of the ones that first they went in and they figured out what was going on, and actually they traced the typhoid to another town, Stony Brook, just upriver of Lowell. And Lowell had a pretty easy solution. They had enough groundwater in the area, they simply just cut off taking water out of the river, and they went to groundwater. But Lawrence was not so lucky. And we're going to step back just a second. I'm going to tell you the theory of the time, right? So the theory was self-purification, that we dump the sewage in our rivers and our lakes, and it's just going to clean itself up. And there's actually some truth to it, but it's not at a cost. It is at a significant cost. So even in my career, in books that were written in the 1990s, on the very front page, the first lesson they taught you was dilution is the solution to pollution. So you got dilution, and then the other thing you have, working in nature, is the bacteria, the same bacteria that we now have harvested and we grow intentionally in our wastewater treatment plants. Well, they live in nature, and they do consume wastewater. The issue is that as they do it, it requires a lot of oxygen. So if you have a heavy wastewater loading inside of a river, those bacteria will help eat it up and purify it, but they also consume all the oxygen in the river in that process, and the habitat's destroyed. You have fish killed, you have those kind of things. So that's one of the biggest issues, in addition to the smell and everything else, is just the oxygen ends up being gone. So rivers can only treat a finite amount of sewage based on the amount of oxygen available. And they also can't treat all types of contaminants. There's just some things that just won't purify themselves. So that was the issue here in Lawrence, right? There's not very much sewage left in the water by the time it gets to their river, but even those small concentrations of typhoid made it so that they had a very unsafe source of drinking water. And Bill Sedgwick's team, they put in our first filter plant. It was a slow sand filter with a biofilm. And this technology was kind of invented. We kind of stumbled across it in Europe several decades earlier. They were field applying all the biosolids and the feces from town. They were putting it on farm fields. And they identified that those that had very sandy soils, it did this nice biofilm to get on it, and then all the water that was running off it was very pure. And that's kind of how they figured out that this was a solution. And Bill Sedgwick was able to actually put it in practice in 1893. The issue with slow sand filters is they're not practical. It's fine for a small town, but slow, being the meaning word, it takes a long time for water to move through them. So if you have a large population, they become too big and expensive to be practical. The other issue is you have a lot of clays and soils in your water, muddy water, it's going to clog those up immediately. So we turned to something called flocculation. Using alum, and what happens with the clay particles in the water is they'll have negative charged ions, and they stay in suspension. They're attracted to each other. And by adding this flocculant, alum in this case, it's a positive charge ion, and they get bigger and bigger until they make a piece of flock that's heavy enough that it actually settles out on its own. And we actually have a video that we can play here. So this is sped up. It's 15 minutes of time, but you see, they add the flocculant to it, you stir it up, and you can almost see the particles in there kind of getting heavy and settling down to the bottom. A cup of muddy water takes a long, long time to clean itself up. But by the use of flocculation, we can take those suspended particles out, and then by skimming off the flocculant and sending it through a filter plant, you see what happens to our water. It becomes very pure very quickly. So flocculation compared with rapid sand filters, which is basically just more porous and the water can go through much quicker, that allows us to treat very large quantities of water. So that's the great news, right? We're able to treat it and remove 99% plus of contaminants, but that last 1%, like Lawrence had, that can still be a problem. So disinfection was a solution to that. The first time we added chlorine gas to water was in 1908 in Jersey City, New Jersey. A pioneering engineer added it to their water system, and those two things combined together have been the standard for water treatment since that time. And they grew up in the early 1900s, the whole water systems. And it allows us to drink water from an unsafe source. So with the creation of water treatment, life expectancy increased 15 years. And it was considered the fourth most important engineering accomplishment of the 20th century. I'm not sure about that ranking, but I am sure that that's pretty good company, right? The electric, the auto, and the airplane. Significant change to the way we live. And provided that, combined with the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974, kind of puts us where we are today. So now we're going to move into the wastewater. How did this come about? It's not quite so clear, but I'll give you the best I can. Waterfront property in the 1900s, early 1900s, was not desirable, certainly not in our cities. Very industrialized. Los Angeles had the luxury of being able to push their water out in the Pacific Ocean a mile, so they didn't have some of the odors, but they had other issues. All their beaches were still almost unswimmable. San Francisco Bay took the sewage discharge for San Francisco, and it's a bay that doesn't have a lot of turnover by the tides. So they measured hydrogen sulfide gas, which is that sewer gas. It's been at high enough levels that it actually fades the paint in San Francisco during the peak here. Nobody wanted to ride across the Bay Bridge, a much different experience than you have today. And this is not just San Francisco and Philadelphia, it's all of our big towns as they became industrialized. So what you have going on is you have your population growing, and we're putting more and more sewage into our rivers and streams, and it's becoming more and more challenge for both for our smell and just the distaste of it, and then also the ecosystems. Oxygen is being depleted across the board. But so far, we're unwilling to spend the cost for sewage treatment. We have figured out a way that we can treat and drink water from unsafe sources. And although sewer treatment had been invented, again, we lacked the political will to spend the money on it. And there are so many things we could point to, the whole environmental movement, but the two I'm going to mention to you here, the Cuyahoga River Fire, easy for me to say, the Cuyahoga River Fire and Silent Spring. I say there could be other ones. So that kind of led to finally our lawmakers putting in the Water Pollution Control Act of '48 and the Clean Water Act in 1972. And that led to our federal government getting into the business of funding sewer and sewer treatment plants. So primary treatment is pretty simple. Settling basins, basically what you do is you have a kind of a hole in the bottom of the tank and you slow the sewage down, and it's heavy, the heavy biosolids are allowed to slip out through the bottom, and we take those away. And then the lightest oils and greases, they float to the top and we skim them off, and anything that's not too light or too heavy, we just push right through. But that significantly reduced the loadings on our rivers, just primary treatment. So, for instance, in San Francisco, in the Bay, they reduced the biological oxygen demand, and that's just kind of the way we measure the amount of sewage, by 88% through primary treatment alone. And then we got even better. We invented secondary and tertiary treatment. We started harvesting those bacteria that we found in our rivers and streams, put them into our water treatment plants, and we let them do their job. What you see here pictured is an aeration tank. So I told you how they love oxygen to do their job, so we actually put huge blowers into the aeration process, and we give them enough oxygen that we kind of put them on steroids, and they just eat up that sewage as fast as they can. So that's kind of the state of the art there. So primary water treatment is fully adapted, and secondary and tertiary, it says it's common on here, but they're essentially fully adapted by today's standards too. So that's where we are with wastewater. Kind of gives you the background on it. Now I'm going to talk about just the recent history and then maybe some things that I see coming up here in the future for us to keep our eyes on. So we've become headline news, the water industry. We had Elk River in West Virginia, Toledo, Ohio, of course more recently Flint, Michigan. And what are our biggest challenges? Well, we got a source water drought issue, like the one that's happening in California. That reinvestment and renewal of infrastructure, I think you've heard that a couple times already at this conference. And that watershed, that source water protection too. So first looking at the source water, the quantity of water and drought issues, our population is going up, and at the same time we're seeing changes in weather, possibly related to climate change. We're seeing hotter, drier weather in certain climates, such as California. But did you know that the last time California had a major drought in 1970, the population was about 20 million? And you fast forward 45 years, that population has doubled. So of course we have a lot more users of water. We've gotten a little bit more efficient at using it, but much bigger populations. Governor Brown had a very well-publicized plan to address the drought. And although it's going pretty well, I got to show you what he's actually done here, right? So we're addressing domestic use only. So 25% of the domestic use is only looking at 5% when we combine that with agricultural use there in California. And we understand why he didn't decide to take on agriculture at this point. It's a long tradition. There's a lot of water rights battles there, in addition to the economic value of that industry. California produces almost half of the fruits, vegetables, and nuts for the United States. But there's a cost to it. So for instance, a little bag of almonds produced from California takes 15 gallons of water for just 16 nuts that come in one bag. And that's no problem when water's falling from the sky, but when you're taking it out of the aquifer and you're not doing it in a sustainable way, it can be a problem. So California is experiencing a significant amount of subsidence. Take a look at this picture here. It shows the 50-year period from 25 to 77, I think. 40 foot of drop in elevation. And it's not all due to the aquifer, but a lot of it is. So one possible way to avoid using so much of the groundwater there is looking to reuse or reclaimed water, right? So there's two types here. We've got non-potable and then potable. And non-potable is the famous purple pipe, right? It's very common in regions of the USA, California, the South, very common here in Florida. And we're using highly treated wastewater effluent, and we're not using it to drink, but only for irrigation and for toilet flushing. So you may have seen these types of pictures even here, right here around Florida. I know we had where I used to work, we had a reclaimed water system, Now, this is a sign I've never seen before, to be honest with you. So I understand the society we live in where McDonald's has to tell us that that hot cup of coffee we just bought is hot and we could burn ourselves on it, but I'm not sure we need to be told not to drink out of the urinals. I think we can figure that one out. The problem with non-potable reclaimed water is it's so expensive. And why is that? Well, here's kind of a map, one of those GIS maps of a water system. And if you're going to have a separate system, you got to build and maintain a whole second distribution system, right? If you're not going to use the same water as you use to drink and for other domestic uses, you have to build a separate system to get it there for your irrigation, for your toilet flushing. So it's really expensive. Potable reuse is much more cost effective. And there's two types here. So there's indirect, and this is pretty common. Our wastewater effluent gets put out into a river or to a reservoir or lake, maybe even to the groundwater, and that mixes up with the other water in the area. And we take that into our water plants and treat it and use it for drinking water. The most cost effective, we kind of get rid of that intermediate step, that environmental buffer, the river, whatever it is, and we actually pipe our wastewater treatment plant discharge right into the headworks or right into the front end of our water treatment plant. That has a little bit of a yuck factor, but it's becoming more and more common in certain areas that are water-starved in our nation. Another possibility is desalination. It's great technology, but the issue is it is so energy intensive. It hasn't really been cost effective, but we're making great strides on desal. The efficiency, it's gotten to where you had to put a whole lot of pressure and able to move water through these reverse osmosis devices. And with technology, we've taken it down to where it's becoming, it looks like within the next couple decades, it might be a viable alternative for those that have oceanfront property. So now we're going to move on to infrastructure renewal. The American Society of Civil Engineers has rated a water and wastewater infrastructure a D. They do a report card every 4 years on that. And I think we can generally agree that infrastructure, as it ages, it becomes less reliable. And just a big picture question is, how much tolerance do Americans have for lack of reliability? I'm not sure we have that answer, and I don't think we're close to getting that answer. I say we're only here when our systems become unreliable or unsafe, or we're really going to see the kind of dollars that we hope to for reinvestment in our systems. But how good a job do we do on the water and wastewater side for providing service? I mean, how reliable are we? I don't have the exact metric for Delco Water, but I'm guessing that if we divide out by our whole 46,000 customer base, we're probably only seeing a few minutes, maybe even less than a minute per year of outage time. We're much, much better than the electric industry or telecommunications. So I don't think these questions can be answered, but that's in my personal opinion, that's when we're really going to start seeing investment. But that doesn't mean we don't need to renew this infrastructure. So that same study that rated us a D says we're going to need $1 trillion on the water side and $298 billion on the wastewater side in the next 25 years to renew this infrastructure or have real problems. And right now, this is grant money, but the grant money coming from the federal government, you can see it's much less, 28 or 42 billion, much smaller than we're going to need. Now, both President Clinton, who currently, President Clinton, excuse me, our presidential candidate Clinton is put $275 million in her spending plan over the next 5 years for infrastructure, and that's not necessarily water infrastructure. And Trump says we need even more than that. I don't think he's identified a number, but we've heard more. But I want to take you back just a few years to something called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We had a new president, Barack Obama, took office, and at the time I was working here in Florida at a water wastewater utility that had a lot of needs for infrastructure reinvestment. And he says we're going to put $1 trillion into reinvesting in America. We get kind of excited about that. But the reality was less than 10% of that money actually got put into what we would consider hard infrastructure. And then we look further into that, the water and wastewater side is maybe less glamorous than some others. And again, we do a good job of keeping our infrastructure reliable. Less than 1%. 0.77%, 8.4 billion of 1.1 trillion went to water, wastewater. Now, I do want to give some accolades to the association. Take a look at the bottom here. 2.4 out of that 8.4 billion was set aside for rural water activities. And that's because of this association doing their job in Washington and telling them about our needs and about the way our rates are in rural America. So they did a great job there. But unfortunately, that 8.4 billion, just the whole pot of money wasn't big enough. But the association did a great job at least getting our portion of it. It's going to take a major crisis, and I don't think Flint's quite there for us yet. I think Flint is enough crisis that Flint's going to get money out of that, but I'm not sure you're going to see a huge amount of trickle down to all the other utilities in the United States. However, USDA, CoBank, and others, they have great, very effective financing options, especially for those of us in rural America. So there are ways to do it, ways to fund it. I want to really thank you for your patience. We're getting towards the end here, so we're going to move on pretty quickly. But a few final conclusion items. The number one takeaway I want you to think about is remember the origins of our water system and that source water quality, right? The Romans in New York City, they found a very pure source, and they kept that source as pure as possible. And that's something we have to achieve. We're not all in a position maybe where we have clear mountain lakes to draw from. But whatever our source is, whether it's groundwater or surface water, we need to protect it to the best we can, try to avoid things like harmful algae blooms we're seeing here in Florida right now. Number two takeaway is that source water quantity, right? And the drought issues we're having, population increases. I don't know where this is going to go, but we may see some challenges to that Great Lakes Accord, and 95% of our source water is there. That's a picture of Lake Mead last year in 2015. They would have loved to have access to the Great Lakes watershed last year. Now, possibly these new techniques, reuse or reclaimed water and desalination, that may be a great alternative. Number three takeaway is reliability and resiliency. And I actually want to give you a specific example of this that's kind of close to home for us. London, Ohio is a suburb outside of Columbus, and it is not on the Delco water system. I want to be clear about that before we go into this. In 2013, their whole city was without water for nearly 24 hours and was under a boil alert for a week once service was restored. And their director says this is a once-in-a-lifetime event and hopes that these new shutoff valves will never be needed again. So I've used this slide for some other presentations too, and I actually used it about 3 weeks ago, and every time I use it, I ask, is there anybody from London, Ohio in here? And the last time I used it, somebody raised their hand, and I said, uh-oh. But he was pretty forthcoming. He wasn't the director up here. And he said, you know, if EPA was doing their job, maybe he didn't use that exact term. He said, we probably should have had EPA tell us to put these lines in ahead of time, rather than wait for a failure. And my challenge for us is, what critical spare parts or redundancy does your system need? You know, if they were really looking at their system, they would have identified it ahead of time. I don't think we need EPA to tell us how to run our systems. We should know how they work. You need to take time to sit down and look at your system and figure out what kind of critical spare parts. Do you need some repair clamps for a line that's just too large to build a redundancy, or do you need a backup pump or something like that? Look at your system and try to identify what we need to avoid that once-in-a-lifetime event. And don't use that once-in-a-lifetime event if you don't have to. I mean, the reality is our systems are mechanical and electrical, and they will break from time to time. But if you can avoid it, you should. My guess is that that same utility director in London, if they had another 24-hour outage in 2016, wouldn't be working for London, Ohio anymore. So let's do what we can to look at our systems to avoid those once-in-a-lifetime events to the extent we can. Takeaway number 4 is that reinvest in your system. Even if your system's relatively new, start thinking about putting reserve aside and including that in your rates, because the reality is the federal government is probably not going to come in with a lot of grant money for us. They may help us with great loan programs. So again, source water protection, source water quantity, reliability and resiliency, and reinvestment. We've got to start repairing our systems before they break apart. I want to thank each of you for your service to your system, to rural water, to the water community. I tell our employees regularly, we have the most important job in our area, the most important industry in the world. It all starts with water, right? If we don't do our job first, then nobody else can do their job. The doctors can't do their job, the police, you know, whatever you think is an important job. If we don't do our job first, they can't do their job. So thank you all for what you do. Water comes first, and you are what provides safe water to your communities. Coming up next, speaking of excellence, is the Awards of Excellence. Please stick around for that. I really appreciate your time. I hope I didn't rattle on too long, and I hope there's at least a few things you took out of this presentation that you're going to find of value. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
welcome back to the stage the President of the National Rural Water Association, Mr. Charles Hilton.
Glenn, thank you for a fascinating presentation. I think I knew a lot of the little parts of that, but I'm not sure that I knew the whole story. Absolutely fascinating. Mr. Cole, happy birthday to you from National Rural Water Association. Thank you for your years of service and all that you've done for your state, for your local water authority, and thank each of you for one for what you do as part of making this a successful program. As we enter into one of the highlights of what we do each year of recognizing those, I was asked to say a few things, and I went back and started thinking about some things, and I thought about a quote from a noted congregational pastor back in the 19th century named Henry Ward Beecher. He said, "We should not judge people by their peak of excellence, but by the distance they have traveled from the point where they started." I thought about that. We're not here today to judge our awards of excellence based on a one-time deal. One simple act that was really great. This minister was correct. What we truly are looking at is what we have done over a period of time and how we have moved forward and exceeded the expectations of those around us. Again, I go back to your presentation. When the Romans built the aqueduct system, unbelievable achievement at the time. And I look at where we come to today. So it's a progression. These awards of excellence are the same thing. National Rural Water Association is made up of 49 separate associations covering all 50 of the United States. These associations represent 31,000 utilities. 31,000. And we think that's a huge number. But then we look at that number, the 31,000 utilities, and they represent thousands more of employees, of managers, of system specialists, of accountants, of engineers. And the one job that I've never had and never want is the customer service representative that works at the front window and has to deal with all the problems of the utility. The most underappreciated people in our utility. You know, I built a new administration complex 10 years ago. The customer service windows are here in our facility. My office is here. As far away from those windows they are. These people exceed the expectation. What I'm saying to you is the challenge of determining who is the best, who is the excellence, who exceeds what we do. It's a very difficult selection. Who are we? We're rural America. What is our background? Small communities, farms, unincorporated areas, and the sticks. The values that we were taught from where we come from was to excel. As I mentioned yesterday, the expectation of our parents and of the culture that we lived in were high. I think about my own parents and talking to me. They expected the highest performance level that I could give. And that was an everyday expectation. Each of you came from a similar background. It's said that because of that, when you have had a taste of excellence, you cannot go back to mediocrity. And that's true. Once you have started to achieve and turn things around, again, back to your presentation, look where we are. Years ago when we started treatment, 99% removal, we wouldn't dream of 99% removal now. We've gone so much above and beyond that. It is the professionals of this industry that does this job each and every day. The charge to the National Rural Water Committee, the awards committee, has been to find those that are the best. Their job has been not to look at one event, not to look at one time, to look back at the progress that has been made. Think back when I started with rural water, probably a little one-page newsletter that we got, a little black and white thing that they would mail out occasionally to us. We look at the professional publications. We look at the e-signs, and we look at all of the ways and the tweets and all of this that I don't even know about. The way we're communicating, we have excelled. This committee's task has been huge. I would expect no less from such an organization than to give of their best each and every day. So today we're going to recognize the very best of National Rural Water. Thank you.
From the beautiful state of Utah, please welcome the chairman of the NRWA Awards Committee, Mr. Paul Fulgham.
Well, good morning and welcome to the National Rural Water Association's Tribute of Excellence Awards. The committee consists of Roger Friend from Wisconsin, Ed Savage from Vermont, and Dennis Nadeau from New Hampshire. Winners were selected from states who submitted applications for consideration. Submissions were independently scored by each of the committee members. The names and locations of the states were redacted to make the scoring as anonymous as possible. The next steps combining the individual scores to determine the winners. At this time, we'd like to ask one representative from the winning states to come up to the stage to accept the award from President Hilton. And immediately following this session, we'd like to ask all award winners to come back to the stage for their pictures after the session is over. Our first award this morning is for Outstanding Achievement in Communications and Publications and Public Relations. The award goes to South Dakota Association of Rural Systems. Rural water pride runs deep in their state. When they pull into town, you know who they are, and with their customers, custom wrap quality on tap vehicles and trailers. In addition to their quarterly magazine, South Dakota also publishes a consumer magazine, a 3-digit digital newsletters, and that create a unified voice for rural water in their state. Their website features an interactive map of rural water systems, online classes, and event registrations, digital magazines, service and fees, live Facebook and Twitter feeds, as well as a history, staff contacts, and promote NRWA affinity programs. They're always looking for innovative ways to promote rural water. Once again, let's congratulate South Dakota Rural Water Association. Our next award is for Outstanding Achievement in Legislative Initiatives, and it is presented to the state association that has demonstrated leadership on a national basis through their federal elected representatives and success in involving their membership in support of national legislation. In 2016, winner of the Outstanding Achievement in Legislative Initiative is Ohio Rural Water Association. With their own state and federal water packs, Ohio contributes generously not only to NRWA, but also supporting decision makers and legislators in their state. Ohio is dedicated to making sure members understand the importance of legislative work. Their legislative work is always reviewed, discussed, and analyzed by their members, while educating, informing their members about legislative issues that are important to rural water. Simply, there is no doubt that they do excellent legislative work for our industry. Once again, let's congratulate Ohio Rural Water Association. Outstanding achievement in technical assistance. Rural Water provides over 100,000 types of technical assistance nationwide every year, providing the most comprehensive, up-to-date, and best technical assistance by any rural water system could need. This year's award goes to Missouri Rural Water Association. December 30th, 2015 saw 3 days of nonstop rainfall, completely flooded a water plant, threatening the water supply of 20,000 residents. While waiting for water to recede to the plant, levels in storage tanks dropped rapidly as customers placed high demand on water reserves. Missouri circuit riders worked through the holidays, spending hours of time away from their families to ensure their town had safe, quality drinking water and quick and efficiently. Once again, let's congratulate Missouri Rural Water. Outstanding achievement in training. This award recognizes the state association that has achieved excellence in providing an extra measure of training to their state utility membership. This award goes to the Rural Water Association of Utah. Utah defines success in training by setting a goal to the organization. The industry turns to their training needs. Working with a variety of state and federal agencies allowed Utah to plan a deliberate system from simply providing CEU credits to carrying out a comprehensive educational program that moves our entire industry towards common goals and objectives. Utah trains thousands every year with their incredible training program. Once again, let's congratulate Utah. Outstanding Achievement in Member Services. This award recognizes a state association that has excellence in meeting the needs of their membership. The Outstanding Achievement in Member Services Award goes to Wisconsin Rural Water Association. Taking care of members of their number one priority, and the strength of the association is directly related to the strength of their members. Wisconsin's member service efforts focus on building strong relationships and strengthening the water and wastewater industries by providing a networking and learning opportunities for members. Once again, let's congratulate Wisconsin Rural Water Association. Now, the most prestigious and most honored award is the State Association of the Year. It is presented to the State Association that projects a team effort in all areas of professional association operations and membership services. State Associations of the Year has excelled in all the categories of the awards, and this is only accomplished by teamwork, strong leadership, and member support. For almost 50 years, this association has been well respected for the high-quality training, services, publications, and advocacy they provide their members. With an active membership of 750 utilities providing water and wastewater to over 2.5 million customers throughout the state, this state is able to offer many resources and programs to benefit their members. Last year, this association trained over 5,100 individuals in all aspects of water, wastewater management through classroom and online courses, regional workshops, and conferences. They are actively engaged in state and federal level, regularly meeting with lawmakers to advocate for our members and promote favorable legislations and cultivate relationships with legislative offices. It is my pleasure to announce the State Association of the Year is Texas Rural Water Association. Let's give Texas a hand once again. Utility members have always been true environmentalists and first line of defense to protect our environment. The Environmental Achievement Award is awarded to an outstanding utility or individual who has gone beyond the normal, everyday requirements of their job in providing an excellent example to all of us on how to be better stewards of our environment. This year, the Environmental Achievement Award goes to the City of Vassar, Michigan, a proud member of Michigan Rural Water. Founded in 1849, the City of Vassar, Michigan, has taken very active approach regarding wellhead protection efforts. In addition to implementing some unique educational activities, Vassar established a line item on their budget so they have money each year to use toward the environmental protection efforts. Vassar established a wellhead protection committee to assist the city with the wellhead protection plan. Information in their consumer confidence report, providing educational giveaways to school children, groundwater models for schools, water and wastewater plant tours, drinking water placemats, design contests, brochures, and extensive newspaper coverage. Once again, let's congratulate Vassar, Michigan for their environmental efforts. The purpose of Energy Efficiency Award is to recognize water or wastewater systems on a national level who has demonstrated exemplary initiative projects on our education on critical role of utility and energy efficiency to the public. This year's award goes to Centerville City, Utah, a proud member of the Rural Water Association of Utah. Centerville City is in changing ways things are done. They recognize the potential need for energy conservation and saving on their system and went to work to make changes necessary. With their innovations, they have practically and literally written the book on water system energy savings. By implementing 15 energy efficiency and water saving strategies, they realize a savings over $262,000 per year in energy, water, and power costs. Once again, let's congratulate Centerville City for their efforts. There are people in our midst who have worked tirelessly almost their entire lives to benefit rural and small systems. We're thankful to each and every one of you for your work and your support for rural water. However, today we want to present an award to a gentleman who is retiring from the rural water after a lifetime of dedication and service to all. The Clark Cronquist Lifetime Achievement Award was named after one of NRWA's original board members. Clark served for over 30 years on the NRWA board, and so it is very fitting that this gentleman be presented with this particular award. I know Clark would be very proud of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Dennis Schwartz of Kansas. Dennis was the general manager of Shawnee County Rural Water District No. 8 for 37 years. He served on the Kansas Rural Water Association Board of Directors for 37 years, holding several offices, including serving as the board president several times. Dennis has served on the Board of Directors of NRWA for 39 years, serving as president from 2000 to 2002. He has served on the Water Industry Coordinating Council, National Water Advisory Council, and the Kansas River Basin Advisory Committee, just to name a few. He is an accomplished photographer and resides in Topeka, Kansas with his lovely wife, Sharon. Help us congratulate Dennis on his award. Could I have Senior Vice President Steve Fletcher come to the stage to present the next award? It is not every year that we present a Man or Woman of the Year award. It is a prestigious award given to individuals who have dedicated their lives and their work to making rural water best it can be. The Man of the Year award is presented to an individual or an organization that have gone above and beyond the normal scope of activities in support for rural water across America, based on their loyalty, dedication, and outstanding contributions to rural water cause. Our 2016 recipient is well known throughout rural water. He's worked in rural water since 1974, has been the general manager of his water system for over 27 years. During his career, he served as a board member for his state association, served on countless committees, and as their president. He is active in his community, his church, and his town, serving on local committees, serving local boards and authorities. He is married, has one daughter, and a son-in-law. Having served on the NRWA board for many years in numerous positions, he is elected president of the NRWA in 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm thank you for Charles Hilton as Man of the Year for NRWA. Thank you, Charles, for all you've done. This time, I'd like to thank President Hilton and the awards committee members. It's been an exciting morning. Would all the award winners please return to the stage at the close of the ceremony for photographs? And once again, let's give all the nominees and award winners one last round of applause. These people and the associations make rural water what it is. Thank you all for your work, your professionalism, and your commitment to quality.